All right. Welcome once again to Interchange. This is Unmute, which is our focus on the pulse of online learning. And tonight we're going to be talking about the online learning from the community perspective, from the perspective of everything that we've learned during the time of COVID and the attitude that we want to be taking moving forward. So let's get started. My name is Paul Nix, and I'm from the Time Repair Corporation. And Interchange itself was specifically started when I started trying to expand the idea of the Time Repair Corporation and the network that I was using. And I ran across an article about a young, forward-thinking entrepreneur who was making waves in the field of soft skill training and lifelong learning. Yep, amazing stuff. And I wanted to reach out and learn more about what she was doing and the motivation behind the successes she was having. And that simple communication to Alexandra of PersEd, yes, on this side, led to a series of discussions that really sort of opened up the way that we were looking at our respective ventures. And our backgrounds, our outlooks were totally different and different enough to really lend variety and richness to that discussion. And I mean, a Californian with Hawaiian roots living in Finland, background in material engineering, and a Lebanese sensation with Greek roots, building a widespread network and investigating the new frontier of education. We decided to open it up further and make it into something that could involve more perspectives and from more far-flung locations in order to really further improve that richness. And to talk more about this interchange in particular, I pass it to Alexandra.
What an introduction, Paul. First of all, thank you for everything that you've said. And what Paul said is absolutely fantastic. And we sort of summarized it in just one word, which is interchange. Interchange is a space of intersection. So where we have different intersecting thoughts, ideas, intersecting voices, backgrounds, engineering, political science, Finland, Lebanon, Greece, Hawaii, California, different countries, different places, different languages, different ways of doing things. And there's another component in interchange that is very important, which is change. And the discussions that we've started and that were at the source of this monthly conversation that we're having. We've been having, this is the third time, so we've been having it for 3 times now, and every time it just brings even more insights and more wonder in the conversation. Today's interchange is at the intersection of more ideas and more countries, because we're going to have Canada on board very soon. And it's at the intersection of the past and the future when it comes to education, when it comes to online learning. And we're not going to talk about online learning 2.0 or 3.0. We're going to talk about online learning 400.0, because things have changed so fast in the past few months, disrupting the model that we've been used to, which is always a good thing. But it's time not just to cope with the change, not just to cope with the disruption, but to reinvent the ways in which we think education, we do education, and we feel education, especially when it's happening online. We have so many different challenges. What we are going to discuss very briefly with Paul now are 3 key ideas that we really wanted to share with you. But to be honest, the heart of the conversation is not going to start until we have on board 2 amazing individuals, great minds in the field of education. We'll introduce them later, so that's a bit of suspense for you guys. And the 3 topics that we're going to sort of approach when it comes to online learning are first the practical aspect of learning, which is not something that we have enough of when it comes to online learning for obvious logistical reasons. But truth is, it has never been truly at the heart of the educational experience before. But now we feel with even more strength, with even more power, how empty the experience is. The second element that we wish to discuss is the social emotional aspect, which is the space where everything is possible when dialogue, when communication, when different people are involved, when there's the feeling that is involved in the conversation. And it's not always easy to do that behind a screen. And when everybody is behind their own screen in their own place. And the third element that we wish to discuss is something that comes and stems from the first two topics and goes beyond them, which is how can we reinvent the contract or the social contract between the learners and the teacher, between the learners themselves, between all this and the administration, between all of the learning ecosystem and the parents, and between that bigger ecosystem in the world. So we have so many connections, so many communication streams that need to be clarified, that need to be explored from the perspective and the lens of another social contract. So Paul, perhaps you wish to tell us a bit more about the first element because of your amazing background in sustainability and some incredibly crafty, creative, practical experiences that you've been doing online. So Paul, what do you think about the first point?
I think that practical skills are absolutely a focus for the future of education, in part just because they have been in so many ways removed from a lot of the educational practices throughout North America, throughout much of the world. When you have an educational system that focuses on the main value coming from a group of people all lined up in rows, recognizing one another and working in competition with one another in order to get the best grades, you've already removed a lot of the incentive for practical learning. And by this, I mean skills that involve and require subjects as well, that require lab time, because it's not really about which student has the best chemistry lab. All of them ideally should be meeting the same objectives and goals, right? So why are we still treating them like they're factory elements that are being tested to see which percentage is best? In this case, we should be really, and especially now that we have removed the distraction of the classroom from the equation, now you've got students all over the world who are at home. They're sitting in front of a computer for hours and hours, and they could be being more practical about their use of time. In addition to that, there are so many different basic labs, basic discovery techniques, explorations in nature, in science, in mathematics, in history, that can be accomplished by walking outside and actually starting to observe the world, by re-empowering kids to explore, by re-empowering students to start learning for themselves and researching for themselves with that time. If we then also encourage them with simple practical activities that can be done with basic household ingredients to, for example, learn about density in water. You can easily mix 4 different solutions of sugar water, right? Different amounts of sugar in each one, and then add a couple of drops of food dye, different colors, to each glass. And then by slowly adding each of these mixtures together, you can see the different levels separate out by color, because each color now is associated with a different density. There's so much you can learn about that simple phenomena, and so many other basic simple phenomena, that if we actually structure them, if we actually make them accessible for parents and for students alike, then they suddenly become a springboard that can actually make the amount of time that you spend in a classroom like this more valuable, because we don't need to spend all day in an online environment. We don't need to spend all day locked into a room effectively with one person kind of directing everyone to sit there and be quiet. That's the opposite of how most of us learn. That's the whole point of play. From the engineering perspective, all play is a simulation of adult life. You're learning about how to adult, how to do different things by simulating it, by practicing it, by playing. And so encouraging this play, which is sort of one of the core concepts of the Finnish educational model, it's an important way to sort of open this up. And the way that parents and teachers can really help best is by becoming those facilitators that allow this to happen. But in order for that to happen, in order for you to get connections between people, because you do absolutely still rely on people being able to communicate, being able to lead, to inspire, to empathize, you absolutely have to be able to focus on soft skills as well, which leads directly into the soft skill and emotional social development, which I would love it if Alexandra could handle, because engineers are not known for their social emotional learning. We are special folks. Please.
Well, it's interesting because it's not as easy as one would think it is. I have no idea why they call it soft skills. It's not soft at all. If anything, it might be harder than hard skills. And I had my share of working with full stack web developers, working on soft skills with them. And the fun story, it wasn't fun at the beginning, it was very challenging, was we started working on a project with an incredible social enterprise in Lebanon. And that was back in February, March 2020. And then COVID-19 happened. And then we went at home. And then I realized, oh my God, I am going to deliver a soft skills training program to full stack web developers online. And that was not something that I thought would be feasible until it happened. And it actually yielded incredible results. Because the components of the social aspect and the emotional aspect can still be explored, even when it's digital, even when it's online. It all depends on how the session, how the dialogue, how the exchange is created and framed, and whether or not it allows and it creates the space for this exploration of interconnectedness, of interdependence, of exchange, and how it allows for oneself to be able to be attuned to their own passions and to their own interest, and to funnel that, to channel that into the becoming of the person and into the becoming of the professional. It's very important to embrace, as you said, Paul, empathy, the emotional aspect. It's very important to embrace the people, which is the social aspect. And this complements the other two P's that you say, so passion and person, people, and it complements what you've said, which is project and play. And when these four come together, it is possible to create an experiential journey, be it online or offline, that really allows those who are part of this journey to live it, to be in touch with it, even if it's digital, even if it's remote. Three very important thoughts and components that I'd love to share with you. First of which is dialogue. If there is no dialogue, if it's a one-way conversation, we're back to the old learning model. It's a one-way conversation. You have the teacher and then the students listening. That doesn't work. The second point is engagement. Create fun, engaging moments where they can play, where they can fun, where can they think of something else, where they can be physical and do something with their body, when they can be emotional and share something about themselves, where they can be creative and try to challenge their neurons and their neural pathways. And a third is voice. And this is not something that we've been discussing a lot lately. And it really says a lot about the title of today's session, which is Unmute. there's a tendency in video conferences to mute ourselves, which is understandable because we want the conversation to be smooth and to avoid all the noise around that. But voice is still important. One, for the individual to feel that they have a voice, that they have a presence within that virtual room, and for the facilitator to have a voice that is active, that is alive, that breathes inspiration and empowerment and enjoyment into the learning experience. And when these components are combined together, along with the 4 Ps that we've discussed, so project and play and people and passion, we have something very chemical, very magical that starts to take place. But that can only work if we have a type of social contract that is installed, that is active, and that allows all the different stakeholders to manage the process and to experience the process in the best possible way. And so I want to go back to you here, Paul, and try to explore this aspect of the experience, which is much more about the social contract and the dynamics within that online learning experience.
Absolutely. I think that that's absolutely the way to transition into it too. We just got a comment from Eva Wizens, which I think was wonderful to hear. Very excited about everything that's going on. Just letting her know that we're going to be getting this posted up later on so that people can check it out, people can share the idea, and people can be a part of the conversation. Because again, even those watching us, we want to facilitate your voice. So as we're going through this, chime in, let us know. If it's important, we might even DM you and invite you into the studio here. I mean, get you connected. But talk to us. It's important for this to be bigger than just the two of us, for example. But this social contract, it really comes down to, in many ways, an agreement. It's a contract. So you look at multiple people being stakeholders and what they want to accomplish. And we haven't really an awful lot involved students in that conversation from a young age before. And I think that it's something that we need to rectify. We need to make clear that students going to school isn't just do as you're told, but students going to school should be something more, where there are amazing things out there. There are amazing things to learn about and do. And by agreeing to meet your end of the contract, you get to participate in this process. In some areas, education isn't necessarily any kind of a guarantee. And in those cases, you find young students who are a lot more eager to be a part of it. In a lot of places, like in parts of North America, it's compulsory and it's expected. And a lot of kids don't know why they're there and they question it, all because they've never had this contract laid out as something that they were signing on to for themselves. And the same way, when a teacher enters a classroom, in Finland, there is a very different response to a teacher entering a classroom than you would find in North America. And this was a bit of a shock to me. Students aren't distracted. They greet the teacher by their first name, like the teacher's one of the students. And the teachers turn around and they don't have any honorifics being used. It's not Mr. or Miss, whatever your last name is. It's not anything special. If a student has a problem in class, they need to eat a snack because their blood sugar is low, or they need to go to the bathroom or take care of something, they don't raise their hand and ask for permission like you would find in a US school. You don't have them given a hall pass that is huge and embarrassing because they needed to use the bathroom. They're trusted to just go and take care of it. So they don't even say anything. They just get up and quietly go, and then they come back when they're done. They're not being treated like it's any kind of police state. And honestly, you have this trust that comes from that. Beyond that, this is a part of, again, not just the Finnish educational model, but the infrastructure that has been laid through generations of investment in Finland, in education, in students getting warm meals, in parents getting good wages so that they can spend time involved in their children's lives, in teachers being both highly educated, well paid, and on top of that, respected, so that everyone involved is coming together with this social contract in place. They believe in one another. They may be quiet and stoic a lot of the time, but Finns come in at a basic level of social contract far better than anything I grew up with in North America. There, teachers had to prove themselves to unruly classes, and those unruly classes were filled with people who were vying for top attention point. I mean, they wanted to be the class clown or the coolest kid in the class, and there was no point to that. It was just posturing. But if we could have bypassed it, how much more would we have discovered? If we could have cut through the budding toxic masculinity among the young men, how much more could we have learned about their own talents and perspective? And if we could apply that same reassessment, renegotiation of that social contract, not just between students and other students, between students and teachers, between students and parents, between teachers and parents, between administration, as Alexandra was saying, and the community, between government and people. This is what needs to be done if we're going to start really reassessing and really evaluating the values that are inherent in systems like the Finnish model. And this, I think, is a perfect opportunity to introduce our guests. And so I'm going to take the opportunity to introduce a couple of folks from the Canadian Open Learning Academy, and I'm going to add them to the stream here. This is John Bobahani of the Canadian Open Learning Academy.
Hi.
And this is Mr. Jalil Hajimir of the Canadian Open Learning Academy. And let me trade things up. I'm going to pull Alexandra back into the stream here just for a second so we can get everybody introduced. If the two of you would be willing to say a brief, quick two-sentence introduction, who you are, background, where you are, etc. Let's start with Mr. Bahani.
Sure. My name is John Bobahani. I am the COO of the Canadian Open Learning Academy. We are a B2B conglomeration of different entities who are educators from different walks of life from different parts of the world. And we are a union of open learning and Finnish style education in Canada. And my background is in cellular and molecular medicine. I come more from the world of medicine, but I was lucky enough to be able to get access to higher level education by having a really good mentor who walked me through the critical phases of my education and really opened the doors to the possibilities of higher level education for myself. I was one of those guys who would have otherwise have been underprivileged to be able to get access to that higher level exposure to see what possibilities are out there for somebody like myself with higher level education. And I said, what a great opportunity after my graduation to go back and help other students who otherwise may have not seen the light or seen the potential in their capabilities. And so with my mentor, with Mr. Hajimir, we created the Canadian Open Learning Academy. And it's been quite a rewarding experience to get to know people like Mr. Paul Nix, who works in Finland with Finland education and its backbone, which is really sustainability. And yeah, I'm really glad to be here.
Fantastic to have you here.
Thank you.
And also we have here Mr. Jalil Hajimir, a fantastic educator. And if you would be willing to say a couple of words about yourself. Oh, you are on mute. Get you taken care of. There you go.
Hello, my name is Jalil Hajimir. My background is mathematics. I've been teaching for more than 40 years, and I'm very happy that I am with you guys and I know you.
And as an added bonus, From my understanding of things, it is Dr. Bobahani, right?
That is right. Yeah, correct.
Just to make sure. Dr. Bobahani here has told me in other sessions that part of the reason that he had this awakening to learning and coming back through things in the first place was because specifically of Mr. Hajimir. It was he who actually lit that sort of spark initially and really opened up this world of education for him. And so I wanted to make sure that we acknowledge that as well, because that is an extremely valuable thing. And all of us need to be able to reach out and thank the teachers in our lives who made that kind of a difference. So thank you, Mr. Hajimir, for being a part of this. And I really could not be happier to have you both here and be able to discuss this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Absolutely. I had a question for the both of you to get things started. I was hoping that one of the two of you could discuss a bit of a case study. Perhaps one of you could talk to us about the transition from physical to online learning, to distance learning, in reference to some of the things that Alexandra and I were discussing, looking at this and considering sort of stakeholder involvement and what it's going to be looking at as we move forward. Would either of you like to field this sort of open question? Perhaps Mr. Hajimir, what do you think about the changes between physical and digital education from your perspective?
To be very frank with you, things are happening very fast and very quick. But one component of online teaching that we have to focus on is human interaction. That is probably the most important component that many institutions are not considering that. You cannot eliminate human interaction from online education, and that's to me that is the most important part of the deal. What many institutions are focusing now is either having the synchronized model like classroom, which is either very expensive or it is not doable. Having a person a couple of hours in front of computer and teaching the way that you were teaching in class is not doable on one side. On the other side is if you look at the way that the asynchronous model is working is really hard to follow for many kids in the world. I don't think the elimination of the facilitator in online model is a good idea, or it is most likely not possible. This is the part that I think it is worth to talk about.
All right. Are you there, Paul, or are we having connectivity issues? Oh,
I had my cell phone mute this time.
Oh, okay. All right.
No worry. We actually do have a few minor connectivity problems. Alexandra is being temporarily removed from the conversation, so I'll be pushing things forward, and hopefully she'll be able to join us again in just a few. But this last little was just me having my mic off, so I apologize for that. But I'm really happy that you've got this perspective on it, and that you've sort of identified the facilitation as that key part that the teachers are bringing to the table, because as I said earlier, that is one of the key facets of the Finnish educational model. And as I understand it, that's something that the two of you are really attempting to champion in the Canadian Open Learning Academy, is to find the adoptable components of the Finnish educational method and to make them accessible and available to students worldwide. Would either of you like to expand on that?
there's a couple of things I would like to mention on this with the aspect of moving education to an online platform. And it relates to aspects of what we talked about earlier, a little bit of that autonomy that happens when a student is engaged online. There's a little bit of self-discipline, organization, time management skills, these aspects, which then the onus becomes on the student, because there's nobody keeping track of the student to make sure they're online at a certain amount of time, or they're contributing amount of effort into a task that's being done. And this is actually something that is more of a life skill, that I think that's something that will carry somebody through their career, even this developing this organization and time management. And it also relates to aspects of like following through with a task, and really taking the ownership of education into your own hands. And one of the aspects that I think this relates to in terms of the Finnish education model, and I think that it can relate to your career outcomes in the future, is that it relates to aspects of leadership later on. Because when you integrate these skills, and it's built into your internal development from an early age, when you grow up and you're a CEO, you're also more regimented and your time management is more built into you. And with the Finnish education model, one of the aspects that we also talked about was the aspect of play. And when you're engaged online, how do you ensure that the child is also, or the student is also embracing regular play? And if so, how are they engaging that? Are they engaging that the right way? Are they learning the critical skills? And also, who's keeping track of the student when they're not in front of their computer and they're getting educated? So all of these little nuances are things that are going to get a little bit hammered out as online education becomes a little bit more mainstream. But another aspect that we can dive into later on is the behavioral aspect of it, and in the aspect of when you're learning in a classroom setting, a lot of the signals of learning that I mentioned earlier when we discussed prior to this was the child's signs that they're learning a task that a teacher is teaching on a blackboard, or when the teacher's sitting beside them, is a different experience when it's done through a medium of a computer or through the internet. And so it's important that the teacher also is aware of the critical things to ask, or open kind of questions to follow up on, to ensure that there's learning occurring through the internet, through the computer medium, versus through an in-person style approach. So that's the aspect. It's also the student and the educator. There's a completely different shift in the way the education system is going to be handled as we move towards this online. So there's a nuance to it. There's a little bit of a trick that we have to really flesh out in terms of educators, even beyond us, outside of us. It's something that's going to have to gradually evolve into itself.
You mentioned something interesting to me, and that was the concept of these signs, these I guess cues that educators can look for in students as they're learning, and how these are changing the perception of them from in person to online, and being able to identify them. What do you think of that in connection to the idea of learning and online learning in general? And either one of you can field this if you'd like.
Mr. Hajimir, do you want to take this one?
You go ahead.
So, if I understand your question, if I could repeat it here, your question was, can you repeat your question if you don't mind?
No worry. I was interested in the cues that you were talking about, the signs that students were learning things, were perhaps in need of a different method. If you could expand on that idea, that concept a little bit, I think that it's something very valuable that is not discussed enough.
Mm-hmm. This is a very educator-specific question. But in terms of the aspects of the things that I've personally noticed in terms of learning things online versus students learning things behaviorally while you're working with them, when you're physically when I've seen when you're teaching a student in a physical setting, a lot of the times you can detect where a learning difficulty is in the aspects of, for example, when you're teaching chemistry, unit conversion and their inability to grasp the aspect of flipping the units upside down when they're doing a division versus multiplication. And when you're doing this online through a computer medium or through the internet, a lot of that aspect of it is skipped, and the student goes directly to the answer, or there's a presumption made that is incorrect. And unless the educator taps in on that presumption or that misconception, there's going to be a lot more troubleshooting involved when you're going through an online medium versus when you're doing it directly with an individual, and as they're writing, you can catch the mistake. So I think these aspects are built in, are going to have to be built into the teaching regimen as we move forward towards an online platform. But I think it's eventually going to become fluid. It's just something that's going to eventually get hammered out. In the beginning, we're going to deal with these aspects of it. But I do perceive that in the future, these are going to get a little bit more hammered out, and there's going to be a new style of education that's going to be tailored to online, which is going to specifically focus on addressing these aspects by asking open-ended questions and making sure. Another aspect I can give you, for example, is it's a duality of it. There's a benefit to it as well. When you're learning in a physical classroom, when a teacher can hone in on a problem in the learning of a child, it's harder for the teacher to come up with random examples abstractly on the spot to facilitate learning on that critical component. Whereas when you're learning online, a teacher can pull through thousands of resources to give multiple examples as they're honing in on the problem area for learning. And then with that extra access to media, they can also get access to different teaching styles. As they can hone in on where the learning problem is for the child, they can come in and approach the teaching the student from different perspectives, as opposed to when you're learning with a pencil and a paper, that's all you have.
I think that that's a really valuable point to take. Again, it's hitting sort of at the core of the problem, the way I see it. And I know this is something I've actually discussed with Alexandra before. Again, sadly, she's still having some connection issues, but I know that she's discussed some of the social impact of this as well. But one of the things that amazes me the most from the engineering perspective is the loss of potential resources for the future. Mm-hmm. When we consider all of this together, when we look at the number of different avenues right now, options, technologies that exist that can help us bridge that gap between information and students. Mm-hmm. And we still have this model where the idea has been to put together a curriculum that can be spoon-fed by a person to a student, when the whole idea of many levels of education, in fact, the entire concept of the bachelor's degree is you're getting a little bit of exposure to a lot of different subject matter so that you can prove later on in any professional career that you have the capability to do research on your own and to teach yourself new subject matter. That's the idea behind it. And I think that should be sort of at the core of education as we move forward. Empowering people by teaching them how to learn and how to dig into the subjects that they care about, so that we don't lose these undeveloped talents. There are so many potential students out there and potential professionals out there. And we've erected a lot of sort of artificial barriers and boundaries, fences between people and knowledge. And some of the barriers are just so confusing to me. Just why would, for example, having a uterus make you better or worse at math? It makes zero sense to me, especially when my own experience with women in class with me throughout my entire education has been that, it's exactly the opposite. You never know who is going to be the best at any given subject when they're actually given exposure to it. So this idea of limiting things by gender, religion, by place of origin, by money, I mean, that's a completely abstract concept that we just made up. And it's something that isn't even following anyone's personal accomplishments. The idea of saying that the next really amazing genius on the face of this planet in any kind of subject cannot do it because they weren't born in the right place or time or alignment of the stars. It seems positively dark age thinking, and we should be at a point based on our technology that we're entering a new renaissance, a place where we can expose people not just to one amazing topic, but expose them to a whole host of topics, a whole host of mentors like Mr. Hajimir here, who can open their eyes to the wonder of those topics and really allow them to explore. And as Alexandra said earlier in another discussion, to express their own voice. I know I'm not the soft skills guy. I'm the engineering guy. So I'm thinking about this in terms of resources and in terms of managing them. But Mr. Hajimir, would you be interested in talking a little about this concept as it applies to the plans that the Canadian Open Learning Academy has for the future? What are you guys planning on next?
Paul, our plan is very, very simple. We want to redefine education. To be very honest with you, one of the problems that I think it is everywhere, essentially in North America, the gap between school and education is huge now. The gap is really huge. The kids are going to the school, they learn so many things that they don't know for what and why they should learn. Those are important because, as you mentioned or Alexandra mentioned in the other session, either the parents think they are important or their teachers are talking about it and they think it is important. No one knows why they should learn those stuff. No one knows why those are actually important. Those are important to have a piece of paper, to have a degree. As you mentioned, the whole concept of education is having a person who can have some skills to be a problem solver, to be creative. As all of us know, school is not a place to train students as problem solvers, to train the students as, to develop their creativity, those kind of things. School is a place that you go to classroom, you fix some errors, you learn a couple of things a day, and then go home and repeat it for 100 days a year, and that's basically it. I think the education is going to find its own way, and people are switching to what it is actually important, what it is usable and doable. To me, the type of education that we have right now is more or less something that nobody knows what it is, essentially in North America. As we move, I guess what happens is more towards the real education, what you really need to solve a problem. What you really need to do something as an engineer, as a writer, I don't know, whatever you call it. The important, the core part is something important, and then people are going to learn, put time on those rather than going to the school. One of the problems that I see in education is problem solving is not the core part. Thinking is not a core part. What else can I name? They don't try to give them the opportunity to the students opportunity to be creative. These are the main parts that we can work on. I personally think the best we can do is using a model which was really, really successful in another part of the world, and grow it slowly, as we talked before, from bottom to top. Parents don't know. Parents obviously want the best for their kids, but they are not aware of what is out there. That's why they emphasize on the classic method, the way that they learned. I don't know, in last 40 years from how many people I heard, those days was much better. I don't know, 30 years ago, education was much better. Just because of this. We dealt with this much physics in classroom, this much chemistry, I don't know, this much mathematics. And they themselves don't know why it is important. Even our teachers here in North America, that's very unfortunate, but it is true. They go to class, they teach, they talk the importance of the subject, they talk the importance of, for example, calculus, but they don't know what it is. And this is the true side of the story. What I think we have to do is very short number of hours of classes as we talk in the form of pilot project in North America, and grow them simple to the point.
I think that makes sense. In that case, what makes sense as far as next steps? What are the sort of solid goals that we should have in mind?
Paul, I think take action is the most important part. We don't need to create something perfect or something good or something amazing. We have to start from somewhere. It doesn't matter from where we start. We have to start from a point and start growing that concept of education. I think we all have some sort of understanding about Finnish type of education. And if we can bring that in a simplest form to North America and grow it, that's the best we can do now.
I agree. I think that's one of the reasons that I actually started this company, the Time Repair Corporation. It's effectively to simplify as much as possible and find the adoptable elements. Because as I said earlier, the Finnish model isn't just a silver bullet. It's not just one thing. A lot of it is societal, and it's been laid down in layers through years and years of investment in people, in students, in teachers, in parents. And we're seeing the result of that investment. Amazing, amazing education. A part of it is that, and we can encourage those aspects and show sort of the value of them. Especially, and Alexandra's chiming in as well, saying it's easier to compare what we already know. The past is sort of a certainty, and showing what it could be, that can be harder. It's immaterial. It's a bit amorphous. But since we have examples like the Finnish system, we can really seize on those successes, and we can empower people to start building, because we are facing amazingly scaled climactic changes in the world, not just COVID, but climate change, all kinds of economic downturns, all kinds of problems, ocean acidification, plastic accumulation. all of these individually would be the sort of massively scaled problem that is difficult to even comprehend, let alone actually start tackling. I mean, just ocean plastic, for example. There are gyres of plastic, effectively islands made out of plastic, forming in all of the major oceans. And the one in the Pacific, we had this idea that it was as big as Texas, but more recent estimates actually show it to be the size of Mongolia. So several times the size of Texas. I mean, this is far beyond people's scale. And anyone who has driven across Texas can tell you that is massive. That amount of carbon, we could start attacking problems like this if we had the resources to do it. And it turns out that we do. There are all kinds of people on this planet looking to start solving problems if we empower them, if we can get them access to education, if we can set them down and say, hey, what is it that bothers you about the world? The odds are a lot of them are going to say, oh, ocean plastics, that really bugs me, and I'd like to jump right into it. Well, we're in an interconnected world where specialists from all kinds of fields go onto their laptops every day, just like the rest of us, and work from home every day, just like the rest of us, and they can be connected to entire groups of students, and there's no reason they shouldn't be. This is part of what I want to aim for in the long run, and it would be fantastic to bring part of the systemic value for sustainability that you find in Finland, and to get that forwarded back to my own home, back to North America. Because whether it's Canada or California, we've got a lot of the same problems going on. And we really could stand to benefit from some of the best systems that exist. That's effectively what we're trying to export. And sorry, this has gotten kind of into a commercial, so I apologize for that, everyone who's watching, but it's a very important thing for me. And I think that it's sort of the direction that education is taking. Because the public programs in the United States have defunded education so completely, it means that we have to find other ways to invest in education. And that seems to be coming from a lot of ed tech models, a lot of different perspectives where we have companies like the Canadian Open Learning Academy, like the Time Repair Corporation, like PersEd, like all of these different groups that are coming together to bridge this gap for the rest of the world. And I'm really, really encouraged seeing so many different stakeholders coming together to start addressing these problems and take it exactly as it is, from zero to something more. And I think that that's really powerful. What about you, John? What do you think about the future of education? What's it going to look like? How are we going to solve these massive problems in the future?
I wish I had an answer for that, but there's some things that I've noticed that it's almost like it's not it feels like it's a coincidence, but when you stop and think about it, it's really not. It's sort of like we were always meant to go this way. And one of the things that really it's amazing for me is that when you stop to think about it, the evolution of Finland education, the sustainability, it really makes sense for us to move into an online platform for this aspect. And when you think about it, cutting down on the papers, cutting down on things like model kits. Like I remember when I was growing up, one of the aspects of learning organic chemistry was that the students would often order these organic chemistry kits just to be able to look at how moving these molecules around better in a three-dimensional way. And that leads to two things. You can either afford to get the kits, so you're going to learn your three-dimensional models better. You're going to have to use plastics to print these kits and learn these three-dimensional models better. And you're going to have to be able to get somebody to help you put them together and understand it. Well, in this day and age with online education, you can do all this with a computer. You can just literally put a laptop or a computer in front of a child and use three-dimensional models using software and help them understand things. So it circumvents a lot of the other aspects of having to use a lot of paper and model kits and send things out through the mail and then the kids having to get them through the mail. It cuts down on all the aspects of it. And when you stop to think about it, you see it's exactly hand in hand on where we should be with Finland education sustainability. And people like you and I and me and Mr. Hajimir, it's almost like it was meant to be for us to be having these discussions at this point in time. It's part of this education evolution that we're going through. And the onus is on us, the ones who are awake, to help wake other people up, to help us on this battle so that there is an end to this, so that we do end up in a future where the education system has been re-energized and it's reaching more people than it ever did in the past, so that we can help create the next level of high-level thinkers who can help change the world in the future. One of the problems that I always like to mention is that in today's day and age, we're getting into a more and more of a dangerous situation where people are becoming dependent on technology without understanding how it works, or understanding how their iPhones end up, what the components of the software and the hardware is in the iPhones or their computers or their laptops or iPads, whatever. What's behind that? And this is an opportunity for people like us who are at this discussion right now to sow the seeds for the next generation, so that not only do they know how their laptops end up in their hands, but they know how to leverage this laptop to make it the most powerful education tool, but they're not also dependent on it. They can get out there into the wilderness and become the next Renaissance man and have those skills built into them because they learned how to use a laptop properly and they understand how to build one if they need it. So it all goes in hand. And then not only that, when they go out and they start become entrepreneurs, they care more about their peers because they were educated well enough to know how to play with their peers and how they care. They have that empathy, that emotional intelligence built into them. And I think it's all related, and the onus is really up onto us to really have that motivation and not really let the hard times get to us, and stand up to the opportunity that we're faced right now with everybody moving to online education. It's really up to us to guide them in the right direction.
I really like what you said there about people being able to sort of rebuild the tools, understand the tools well enough to get the real value of them, because that's an important concept, and I think that's sort of core to a lot of the best work that I've seen being produced over the last decade or so, is connecting people back to the most simple ways of understanding subject matter, of understanding their tools, of understanding how to interact with one another and with nature, because that's where you get a lot of really, really excellent development.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Alexandra's been talking through chat as well, as you guys may be able to see, and she's been talking about this need for the expressive importance of adaptability and inventiveness, those key components of 21st century education, which has been a big thing in the modern Finnish curriculum, 21st century education, and even the 7 core competencies that people will go over. These are basic concepts that focus on people being able to interact, to be able to understand their tools, to be able to understand one another. And yeah, and I agree as well with Alexandra. Loving what you said, John, about the 21st century being an opportunity. Are we in the 22nd? I don't even know which century we're in now, but being an opportunity for a new renaissance, for people to be able to build from scratch what they would like for their own purposes, whether it's artistic, whether it's musical, whether it's scientific, or all of the above, because there's no reason not to start interconnecting a lot of these subjects and start focusing on those gray areas where things connect. If that's where you really want to specialize, fantastic. We need people to specialize. We need people to understand all of our subjects well enough so that they have fun exploring. Even once they're a little bit older and trying to be entrepreneurs, it's good for them to be able to get out and try different things. And I think that you gain a lot from that.
Mm-hmm.
This is, I don't know, really, really an incredible talk. Thank you guys for being able to donate so much to these different topics. Is there anything that either of you would like to talk about, or feel has been missed from the conversation thus far?
Paul, one question I have: from where should we start? It's not what the future. It's important to know what the future of education is, but I think redefining the term education as of today and start working on the new format of the education is the most important part. This is what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
What is education? What is the true meaning of education as of today? And from where we should start. This is the key point, I guess. I guess if we start growing this, one of the things that I learned from the Finnish education is not about the system; it's about the values. Right? This is the most important part too.
I absolutely agree with this, and I've actually been looking as well at the same sort of angle with time repair and with Marcus Sheehan, who is the pedagogic developer that I've been working with here. That's one of the things that we're actually trying to specifically shape up, basing it off of, to a degree, the Finnish model, but creating something starting at nothing effectively, so that we can get people involved.
That is the key. It starts from nothing is the key.
Yeah. And I know that we've been chatting a little bit in some other channels, and I'm really excited about the idea of continuing that out with the Canadian Open Learning Academy, to sort of build up this idea of going from zero to a complete civilization, to being able to empower people so that if they felt like it, they could really just start with next to nothing and understand their resources well enough to build locally and sustainably, and to sort of inspire this value for education and for one another, for community and conversation, as well as information, because there is a lot of value in this data. I want to thank you guys again for coming out here, and I want to thank Alexandra again. I saw her trying time and time again on the back end here, trying to reconnect to our chat. And she has one more question for Mr. Hajimir. How would you define education? That's a good question.
Yeah, that is a really good question. And I think it is not how I define. I guess we have to define it together.
I like that. That relates back to the social contract thing. Would you like to expand on that any further, or?
I don't know how much time do we have, but I'd rather to leave it for later, if it is possible, to discuss it a little bit more details and find a better way for that definition. But I think till we think education is school and classroom and online software, those kind of things, we are far from the definition of education. It is something else. It is definitely something else. It's a vast industry, and different components of that industry should be defined carefully and work on those in details to be able to shape the future.
I agree. And again, being able to involve those different stakeholders, and I like that we've already been able to discuss a lot the idea of, as Alexandra's saying in the chat, offering different alternatives and looking at the different methods that are being used all around the world, because this is the key to the practical part of the discussion that I started at the beginning, is that we're in an open source environment now. We're in an environment where lots of people have been trying different things, and we have access to all of their data. It's here. So we can build based on the best, and we can get things started, as we've been saying, in redefining that social contract, redefining what education is, what our goals are, what stakeholders have to be able to put into it and invest. Because there is an investment When John and I were kids and we had the opportunity to learn, you, Mr. Hajimir, offered him a chance to really invest not in education, but in himself, in his confidence, in his ability to become something more. And I think that it made a huge impact in his life. It's part of what brought him here. And similarly, we have to be able to offer people that potential, the opportunity as parents, teachers, students, and as a greater community. Even if you don't have a kid of your own who's going to school, you should still be able to invest in that community through education. And there are ways to do it. I like the idea of holding on to this defining education for another topic, because that, I think, would have some incredible value. For those of you who are watching our video, feel free to chime in through either our chat or through either Time Repair Corporation, PersEd, or even the Canadian Open Learning Academy through any of our social media channels. Reach out to us. Talk about what aspect of education, what aspect of community and communication you'd like to hear more about. And I think that it would be a great place to sort of start the discussion for future topics. In summary, I wanted to sort of offer the idea that getting students ready for the future is sort of the core of all of the topics that we've been going through, not necessarily just replicating material, because that's been sort of part of a system that we've seen a lot of flaws in and that we haven't really been able to work with in a digital medium to the same extent. We've been seeing a lot of cracks, but being able to look by starting at values, skills, mindset, I think that that might be the angle that will start to get us into the future of education. Taking this transition so that we can see more. For those of you out there who've been tuned in, I want to thank you guys again. I would really love to hear in the chat, in any comments, about the best experiences. Ideally, you can go best and worst, but a lot of people are just going to be talking about the connection difficulties they had when COVID started. But talk to us about the online learning experience. Ideally, what has been done right? What can be replicated? Let's get this conversation going. And we will see you all again next month, ideally with less connection difficulties here on Interchange. I want to thank you guys again on behalf of Alexandra and PersEd, on behalf of the Canadian Open Learning Academy. Mr. Hajimir, John, thank you both for being here. And on behalf of the Time Repair Corporation, my name is Paul Nix. Please tune in and see us again next month. It's always going to be the last Wednesday of the month, and we'll see you then.
Ciao.
Ciao.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.